I never thought babysitting was gonna be scary. I mean, all I had to do was watch a couple of kids while their parents went out for dinner. How hard could that be? But man, was I wrong. It all started when I arrived at their house. It was a big old mansion on the outskirts of town. I had never been there before, and it gave me the creeps. When the parents left, I tried to entertain the kids with some board games. But they weren't interested. They just sat there, staring at me with these weird grins on their faces. I asked them if they wanted to watch a movie or something, but they just kept grinning and didn't say a word. I started to feel really uncomfortable, like I was being watched. I decided to make some snacks in the kitchen, thinking maybe the kids were just shy. But when I turned on the oven, I heard a voice whisper, "He's coming for you." I jumped back, looking around, but there was no one there. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but then I heard it again. And this time, it sounded like it was coming from the pantry. I was too scared to check, so I just ran back to the living room, trying to act like everything was normal. But the kids were still just staring at me, and I could feel their eyes following me wherever I went. I tried to engage them in conversation, but they kept giving me one-word answers. I was getting really creeped out, and I just wanted to go home. That's when I heard the scratching. It was coming from the hallway, and it sounded like something was dragging its nails against the wall. I asked the kids if they heard it, but they just smiled wider. I knew something was really wrong then. I decided to call the parents and tell them I wanted to leave. But when I picked up the phone, there was no dial tone. And that's when I noticed that all the windows and doors were locked from the outside. I started to panic. I was trapped in this creepy house with two strange kids who wouldn't talk and something scratching at the walls. I tried to stay calm and think of a way out. Then the phone rang. I hesitantly answered it, hoping it was the parents. But all I heard was a deep, menacing voice saying, "You can't leave. He won't let you." I dropped the phone and ran to the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. And then I saw him. A tall, shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway, just watching me. I screamed and ran back to the living room, where the kids were still sitting, grinning at me. I could feel the fear taking over me. I didn't know who or what this figure was, but I knew I needed to get out of there. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and ran back to the living room. "Who are you?" I yelled, holding the knife out in front of me. The figure just stood there, watching me. And then I noticed the kids were gone. I was alone in the house with this mysterious stranger. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled back into the hallway. That's when I saw it. A face etched into the wallpaper. It was twisted and contorted, with an evil grin and glowing red eyes. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew it was him. The one the voice on the phone was talking about. The one who wouldn't let me leave. I mustered up all my courage and asked the figure, "What do you want?" He just laughed, and then I heard it. The sound of children giggling. I turned around to see the two kids standing in the hallway next to the twisted face on the wall. But they weren't just kids. Their eyes were glowing red, and they were holding hands with the figure. "We're his playmates," they said in unison. The figure started to move closer to me, and I knew I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I threw the knife at the figure, causing him to disappear, along with the twisted face on the wall. And then everything went dark. I woke up in the living room the next morning, the sun shining through the windows. The doors and windows were unlocked, and the kids were sitting on the couch, watching TV like nothing had happened. I asked them if they remembered anything from the night before, but they just smiled and shook their heads. I never babysat for that family again. And I still get chills whenever I think about that experience. But one thing's for sure, I'll never underestimate the horror of babysitting again. I had never babysat before, but I needed the money. So when my neighbor asked if I could watch her two kids, I said yes without thinking much about it. But little did I know, it would turn into the scariest and most horrifying experience of my life. I arrived at their house at 7 p.m., just as the sun was setting. The mother hurriedly gave me a list of instructions before she left for the night. The kids are already asleep, so you shouldn't have any trouble. Just make sure to check on them every hour or so and give them their medicine if they wake up coughing. Oh, and there are some strange noises in the attic, but don't worry, it's just the pipes. And don't go up there, it's not safe, she said before rushing out the door. I tried to shake off the creepy feeling her words gave me and went to check on the kids. They were sound asleep in their beds, so I settled in on the couch to watch TV. But every time I heard a noise, I couldn't help but look towards the attic door. It was an old house, and the creaking and groaning of the floorboards only added to my unease. At around 8 p.m., I heard a sound coming from the attic. It was a soft scratching, as if something was trying to claw its way out. I tried to brush it off as the mother's warning about the pipes, but it only got louder and more persistent. I decided to go and check on the kids again, just to make sure they were okay. But as I approached their room, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. I could have sworn I had closed it earlier. I took a deep breath and slowly pushed it open. Everything seemed normal at first, but as I got closer to the bed I noticed something strange. One of the kids was missing. I panicked and frantically searched the entire house, but they were nowhere to be found. Finally, I heard a soft whimpering coming from the attic. I hesitated, remembering the mother's warning, but my instinct to protect the child overpowered my fear. I slowly climbed up the creaky steps and pushed open the door. What I saw will haunt me forever. The missing child was sitting in a corner, hugging their knees and rocking back and forth. But that wasn't the worst part. In the darkness, I could make out the silhouette of a figure with long, sharp fingernails and glowing red eyes. It was crouched down, facing away from me, but I could feel its malicious presence. I grabbed the child and ran out of the house, never looking back. I called the police and told them everything. They searched the house but found nothing. They said it was probably just an animal that had gotten into the attic. But I knew what I saw, and I knew it wasn't just an ordinary animal. I never babysat for that family again, and they moved away soon after. But that wasn't the end of my nightmare. The next time I babysat, it was for a different family in a different house. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt that same sense of dread and unease. And just like the last time, strange things started happening. The TV would turn on by itself, toys would move on their own, and I could hear whispers coming from the walls. I brushed it off as my imagination until I saw a glimpse of a figure standing in the corner of the room. But every time I turned to look, it disappeared. I was becoming more and more afraid, but I couldn't leave because the parents weren't due back for a few more hours. I tried to keep myself busy and ignore the strange occurrences, but then I noticed something chilling. The family had a picture on their wall of their 2 children, but one of them was missing. I couldn't believe it. It was the same child that had disappeared in the other house. I was paralyzed with fear, knowing that whatever was haunting me had followed me to this house and was targeting the children. I tried to call the parents, but my phone wouldn't work. I tried to leave, but the doors were all locked from the outside. I was trapped with the children and that thing. The rest of the night was a blur. I remember feeling like I was being watched, and I could hear the figure moving around the house. I could feel its cold breath on my neck and hear it whispering my name. I was terrified and knew that I was in grave danger. But finally, the sun started to rise and the parents came home. They found me curled up in a corner with the children, sobbing and shaking. I quit babysitting after that and never set foot in that house again. But to this day, I can still feel its presence and hear its whispers in my ear. I will never forget that babysitting horror story and the terrifying experiences I had that night. Some things are better left unexplained, and some jobs are not worth the money. It was my first time babysitting and I was so nervous. I didn't have much experience with kids, but my neighbor offered me the job and I couldn't turn down the easy money. The couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were heading out for a fancy dinner party, and I had to watch their 6-year-old daughter, Lily. When they left, Lily was already asleep, and I was grateful for the few quiet hours ahead of me. I decided to make myself comfortable on the couch and watch some TV. But as the night went on, things started to get weird. The TV kept turning on and off by itself, and the lights flickered. I tried to brush it off as bad wiring, but then I heard a child's laughter coming from upstairs. I was too scared to investigate, so I just turned up the volume on the TV and tried to ignore it. But then I heard footsteps running up and down the stairs. I thought it must be Lily, but when I went to check on her, she was still sound asleep in her bed. I was starting to get really scared now. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard a voice whisper, "Play with me." I froze in fear, and then I saw Lily's doll, sitting on the floor with its head turned toward me. I screamed and ran out of the room, almost tripping over my own feet. I wanted to call Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, but I couldn't find my phone. I felt like I was trapped in a horror movie. I decided to check on Lily again, hoping that she was awake and could help me. But when I got to her room, she was gone. I searched the entire house and couldn't find her. I was panicking now, thinking that someone had taken her. But then, I heard her giggling from the closet. I slowly opened the closet, and there was Lily, playing with her doll. I tried to tell her that we needed to leave the house, but she just looked at me with a cold, blank stare. She said, "We don't want to leave. We have been waiting for you." I screamed and ran out of the room, grabbing my phone on the way. I called Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, and they rushed back home. When they arrived, everything was back to normal. Lily was sound asleep, and there was no sign of any strange occurrences. I tried to explain what happened, but they just laughed it off and said I must have been watching too many horror movies. But I know what I saw and heard that night. I never babysat for the Thompsons again, and I couldn't even look at Lily without feeling a chill run down my spine. I learned my lesson: never take a babysitting job without asking for all the details, and never underestimate the power of a child's imagination. I will never forget my first and last babysitting experience.